Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the International Kindness Festival 2021. Our next speaker, Nandini Murali, is an author and certified life coach who focuses on loss and transition. She's also a suicide prevention and mental health activist. So Nandini will talk about surviving suicide loss. Nandini, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Suresh. April 27th, 2017. That was the day my life changed forever. That was the day when one suicide killed two people. That was the day I lost my precious partner and the sun plunged into darkness. Space dissolved, time stood still. My life changed forever. One chapter in my life, that of a wife, was over. On April 27, 2017, I lost my husband, Dr. T.R. Murali, a well-known urologist, to suicide. Until that day, I had no engagement with suicide. I had no idea. My only engagement with suicide was some news reports in the media. But that day, I had no questions. I had no answers, only questions. My only question was, why had this happened? And what could have been done to prevent it? On that day, I also realized I had gained membership into an exclusive club, a club in which membership is always by chance and not by choice. On that day, I also realized I had acquired a new identity, that of a survivor of suicide loss. This simply means that a survivor of suicide loss is someone who's lost a loved one to suicide. It could be a family member, a close family member, a close friend or colleague, or anyone with whom you've had a close relationship. As we're all aware, suicide is not something that is spoken about easily or openly across societies in different parts of the world. There is a wall of secrecy, shame, and silence surrounding it. I realize that people like me, we are known as people with a lived experience of suicide loss. This simply means we've had a direct, first-hand, personal experience of having lost a loved one to suicide. We are experts by experience, and that is as important as the kind of academic credentials people earn. On that day, April 27th, 2017, my internal GPS had crashed. I just felt I was navigating a wilderness in which I was completely disoriented, had no sense of direction. I was completely clueless, and I felt like a cork tossed around in a turbulent ocean. And as I stopped and surveyed the wreckage of my life, I stooped to pick up fragments from the debris. And sadly for me, I realized the old, the familiar, the known had all been reduced to rubble. And here I was surveying the wreckage of my life, not knowing what was in store for me, because life as I had known it had completely changed in just a nanosecond. That was when I realized that there was so much of unpredictability and uncertainty in life, and everything I had taken for granted was just no longer there. Suicide has been described as a death like no other. According to the WHO, the World Health Organization, across the world, every 40 seconds, someone in the world dies of suicide. Every 41 seconds, someone is left to make sense of it, like I did. And every year, close to about 800 million people in the world die of suicide. And in India, we have among the highest suicide rates in the world. We account for something like 17% of the world's suicides, and the highest number of suicides among women in the world are from India. Yet, I'd also like to reiterate that people who die of suicide are not nameless, numberless statistics. And because for someone like us, someone like me who's lost a loved one to suicide, it represents the loss of everything our life stood for. And we are very concerned that our loved ones are not just nameless, faceless statistics. As some of you might have guessed or perhaps have known, suicide is a sudden, violent, uh, unanticipated, and often a shocking death. It's a self inflicted death where a person decides to kill himself or herself. And it's something very nobody has able to wrap our heads around, because it violates every norm of self preservation. Every living being wants to live at any cost, but then why do some of our loved ones choose to kill themselves? And until it happened to me, I realized that there was suicide was something that could happen only to others. It could happen to other families, not to me, but not to in my family. This I realized was the otherization of suicide. It's not something that can happen in my family, but of course once it happened to me, everything changed. And even then, when it actually happened to me, I was very puzzled, I was very confused, I was shocked. I didn't know how to respond. And immediately, what ran through my mind was, what would I tell people? What would I tell family? What would I tell friends? What would I tell my colleagues? What would I tell my husband's colleagues? Would they judge me? Would they judge my husband? I just felt this acute sense of embarrassment and a sense of shame. This was before even other people started coming around. And I work with the most marginalized communities, and I know what stigma is, what shame is, why people choose to hide certain things. But it was only when it really happened to me, I realized, oh my gosh, this is what exactly I've been working with other marginalized communities. So therefore, I was faced with a choice. One part of me wanted to actually hush up and cover it up, and pass this off as a death due to due to very socially acceptable causes. I think in my workshop we're going to be looking at disenfranchised grief. The other part of me wanted to really speak the truth, wanted to look truth straight in the eye, because I felt that this was a topic where there was no conversation. If at all there were conversations, it was very hush hush. It was misinformed. There was so much of gossip, so much of speculation, and I wanted to be the change I wish to see in the world. So therefore, on April 27th, I think it was on April 28th, I decided I'm going to look truth straight in the eye, because I had done nothing to be ashamed of. I had nothing to be done. I had done nothing to be embarrassed of, and my husband was not a criminal in the remotest sense of the term. So what was the need to hush it up? And therefore, I said this iron curtain of secrecy, shame, and silence, which shrouds suicide, needed to be apart. And interestingly for me, when I discovered when the suicide happened, I was traveling on work. And so, for some time, I thought maybe I'll have two versions of what really happened: the official version, which I will share with a few close friends, and the real version, and an official version, which would find some socially acceptable reason for the cause of the death. But then my desire to be authentic, my desire to look truth straight in the eye, my desire to be the change I wish to see in the world overruled, and I decided I'm going to go full out and actually out myself, because I realized as I went along there were so many layers and layers of complex and complexities surrounding this very complicated issue. And I think, to cut a very long story short, um, in the interest of time, I think the initial days, it would be an understatement to say that the initial days were very difficult. Oh, it was so challenging. And that was when I realized that if I were to survive this horrendous tragedy, it was like being sucked into a black hole of grief. And I I realized that to survive this tragedy, I would need to survive it not day by day, but actually nanosecond by nanosecond. That was how difficult it was. And in the initial stages, it was like being engulfed by a very powerful tsunami of emotions like shame, fear, anger, embarrassment, guilt, and self blame, and it was like, and it would just ambush me. With the ruthlessness of a very powerful predator, I never knew when I would get throttled by these emotions. And then, of course, my own experience of suicide loss shattered this myth of vulnerability. And as every survivor of suicide loss realizes sooner or later, suicide is a very public act. It's out in the open, and but the pain is, the grief is so private and it's so intense. As a survivor of suicide loss, I had to confront multiple challenges: gossip, relentless speculation, public gaze, intrusive probing, insensitivity. I say all this because all this compounds our primary loss. And often a suicide loss is very, very traumatic because of the violent and self inflicted nature of the death. And I experienced enormous shaming and blaming, of which every survivor of suicide loss goes through. And this is very interesting because this is one of the main reasons why suicide deaths are underreported, because people don't want to come under the moral scanner, because it is something which society frowns on, brands it as crime or sin. And the reason why I decided that I must speak up and I needed to be the catalyst to initiate these very fierce, uncomfortable conversations on suicide is that families of survivors of suicide loss are often at a very high risk of suicide. Sometimes it's almost as high as 400 times higher than the rest of the population. And nobody has any clue as to how to respond, what do we do, and things like that. And for me, the first 15 days, which also coincided with the mourning and the rituals, just went by in a blur. And if I would look back today, it's just about 4 years since the tragedy. And I would say that it was, I think, shortly 15 days thereafter, I remember Googling desultorily about suicide. And the first thing that came up for me was survivor of suicide loss. I consider myself reasonably well informed. And yeah, I must admit that even for me, that was a very new term. Until then, I hadn't heard of it. I also came across another term, postvention, for survivors of suicide loss. I'd heard of prevention, but postvention, oh my God, that again was another new term. And there was another, I was just, once again, my curiosity was piqued. And although I was not in a position to read or write, yet there was this deep desire to make meaning of what was happening to me, because I seemed to have no clue, and neither did people around me. So then that was when I came across this lovely book by Carla Fine. It said No Time to Say Goodbye. And it said that Carla Fine was also has been someone impacted by suicide loss. So I just ordered the book because I thought, oh, maybe is there something for me there? And then when I got the book, I just read it cover to cover in a matter of few hours, because Carla, like me, is also a journalist, a writer, and someone who had lost her husband to suicide. Incidentally, her husband was also a very well-known urologist in New York. The coincidences, or the seeming apparent coincidences, were impossible to believe. And what I loved about the book was its very empowering stance, and here was someone who refused to be cowed down by what happened to her. And Kala's story about how she made meaning out of her loss, and how she decided to tell her story and inspire many people like her who'd been in this situation, struck a chord with me. And I immediately, there was her email there, and I just emailed her thanking her for sharing her story. And I had no clue whether she would get back, but she did get back to me within a couple of hours. And since then, it's been the beginning of a beautiful friendship and sisterhood. And I just said, okay, this, I needed to see how I could rebuild my life in a very empowering manner, because it was so easy to give in to the victimization, to fall into the victim trap, and get into the self-pity mode. Oh, why me? I didn't deserve it, and all those kind of endless non-linear circles. But here was someone who showed me the way, who had actually walked the path. And I just, I don't know, it just resonated so much with me. And I also, yeah, so, and uh, this was just a month after the tragedy happened. I'm keeping an eye on time, and I looked up to see if there were similar stories about people in India who had been impacted by suicide loss, and who had written about it. But I found there was no book available, and therefore I said, okay, I think probably I need to write my story, tell my narrative, because I felt this incessant gossip and speculation seemed like taking away my power to own my life and to tell my story the way I want to. So, writing my book, Left Behind Surviving Suicide Loss, I'd like to believe it was an act of transgression. It was a very subversive act, because I wanted to provide a counter discourse to this very disempowering narrative which is out in the mainstream. And so I think exactly a year after the tragedy, I started writing my book. It took me 2 years to write the book, and writing it was a very healing, empowering, was deeply transformative for me. And in the meanwhile, what I also did was, on the first anniversary of my husband's death, we set up a little initiative called Speak, which was all about creating safe, supportive spaces for informed conversations about suicide. Because I felt that unless we create those spaces where people can have those really fierce, meaningful conversations, unless we really move the conversations from the margin towards the center, prevention is just going to be just all rhetoric and nothing happening on the ground. And I think about 4 5 months later, we also set up a helpline, Speak to Us, to reach out for people in people in psychosocial distress, people who are suicidally ideated. I say all this because all of these are my way of re-engaging with the world in a very meaningful, in a very purposeful manner. And the message I wanted to send out through my book and through my engagements with suicide discourses: we need to value, we need to honor, we need to elevate the centrality of the lived experience of people. And as far as the suicide discourse is concerned, in our country at least, I feel that people with lived experiences are not a central part of the discourse, because I think we bring in so much of insights and wisdom because we've lost it all. And I also think that we have the potential, we can be catalysts for prevention as well. So my book talks about all my journey at length. It's been a very, very challenging journey. It would be very simplistic for me to say that it's been anything but easy. I still think it's a work in progress. But I think as I said in the previous panel, every adversity, every challenge has within it the seeds of opportunity. And I also think it's up to us to decide how are we going to respond to it, whether we're going to yield or whether we're going to use it as an opportunity to transform through the pain and sorrow. And I think this whole journey for me has been about reclaiming my power, taking back my power. It's about my agency and autonomy. And today I realize I'm not speaking for myself, but on behalf of so many people impacted by suicide loss, who I also realize may not have the privileges I have to articulate this. It's about this deep burning desire to look at truth straight in the eye, because and it's also about having the courage to tell my story, simply because it might inspire others to be brave with theirs. And it's also about, as an artist, as an author, I think it's extremely important for me to be authentic. And I also see that this has been an incredible opportunity for me to be authentic, and in my art as well as in my life. It's not been without consequences, but I also realized that no decision is consequence free. And today I do not regret my decision to own my story, to tell the truth, because I think it's so important that we have these conversations. And I think in a platform like this, mm, most people don't know how to respond. And I think it's we people who've been impacted by the loss, uh, I think we have a responsibility of also telling people, yes, while we do agree that you do not know what has happened, you also we are here to talk about our experiences. So listen to us. So we're looking to build those bridges of connection, um, and foster those very deep engagements with diverse stakeholders. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Nandini.